Cale Voran's boots clanged against the metal deck plates as he made his way through the cramped corridor of his ship, the Nomad's Fortune. The vessel was a testament to pragmatism rather than aesthetics, a patchwork of salvaged parts and improvised repairs that somehow managed to hold together in the void between stars. Much like himself, Cale thought wryly. He paused at the cargo bay entrance, fingers dancing across the worn security panel. The lock disengaged with a reluctant hiss, revealing the small but precious cargo he'd acquired on Helios Station. Medical supplies, luxury food items, and a few pieces of tech that technically weren't contraband but certainly weren't authorized for transport without the proper Concord permits. Permits that would cost triple what he'd make on the entire shipment. Cale checked his chronometer. His new passenger was due to arrive in 20 minutes. He grimaced at the thought. He rarely took on passengers. They were unpredictable variables in an equation that already had too many unknowns. But the fee sheet offered had been substantial enough to silence his objections, enough to finally pay off Morden and get that blood-sucking loan shark off his back for good. The comm unit on his wrist chirped. "Captain Voran," came the Port Authority's automated voice. "Your registered passenger has arrived at Docking Bay 7 and is awaiting clearance to board." Early. He didn't like that. Early meant eager or desperate, neither of which inspired confidence. "Acknowledged," he responded tersely. "Send her through." Cale made his way to the airlock, hand resting instinctively on the blaster holstered at his hip. The port of Nexus Edge wasn't known for its security, and while Concord's influence here was minimal, it wasn't non-existent. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. The airlock cycled open to reveal a slender woman with features that struck Cale as both delicate and sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, accentuating high cheekbones and eyes of such a deep violet they seemed almost black in the ship's harsh lighting. She wore simple, practical clothing, fitted pants, sturdy boots, and a jacket with too many pockets to be entirely innocent. A single bag was slung over her shoulder, remarkably light for someone supposedly making a long journey. "Captain Voran?" Her voice was lower than he'd expected, with a subtle accent he couldn't quite place. "That's me," he replied. "You're Lyra. No surname, according to your booking." Something flickered across her face. Caution, perhaps, or calculation. "Just Lyra is sufficient." Cale shrugged. "Your credits transferred cleanly, so your name is your business. But let's be clear about mine. This isn't a passenger liner. I don't provide amenities, I don't make detours, and I don't ask questions about your business if you don't ask about mine. We reached the Carillon neutral zone in 6 standard days, assuming no complications." "Complications?" she queried, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Concord patrols. Raiders. Mechanical issues. Space is full of complications, especially in the sectors we'll be traversing." He gestured for her to follow him inside. "I've prepared basic quarters. It's nothing luxurious, but it's private and secure. I don't require luxury, Captain. Privacy and security are more than adequate." She stepped aboard, her movements fluid and economical. Cale noticed she scanned the corridor with a thoroughness that spoke of training or experience, not mere curiosity. "Where's the rest of your crew?" she asked as they moved deeper into the ship. "Don't have one," Cale replied. "The Fortune is retrofitted for single operation. More crew means more shares of the profit, more potential for disagreements, more mouths to feed, and more people to trust," she added softly. Cale gave her a sidelong glance. "Exactly." He showed her to a small cabin that contained little more than a bunk, storage compartment, and a tiny washroom. "Galley's 2 compartments down. Help yourself to rations, but the good stuff in the locked cabinet costs extra." Lyra set her bag on the bunk. "When do we depart?" 2 hours. I have a few final supplies to load. Feel free to settle in or explore the common areas. Engine room and my quarters are off limits." He turned to leave, but paused at the threshold. "One more thing. In an emergency, you follow my instructions without question. This ship is the only thing keeping us alive in the void." "Understood." She met his gaze directly, and for a moment, Cale felt an odd sensation, as if something vast and unfathomable lurked behind those violet eyes. Perfectly, Captain. I have no intention of jeopardizing our mutual survival. After Kale left, Lyra carefully locked the door to her quarters and removed a small device from her jacket pocket. She activated it, and a subtle hum filled the air as it disrupted any potential surveillance. Only then did she open her bag, extracting a small metallic object that pulsed with an inner light that seemed to shift between colors in a pattern no human eye could fully track. She cradled it in her palm, whispering words in a language that had never originated on any human world. The light responded, intensifying briefly before subsiding. Satisfied, she returned the object to her bag and deactivated the countermeasurement device. She sat on the edge of the bunk, shoulders slumping slightly as tension momentarily ebbed from her posture. 6 days to the neutral zone. 6 days to evade Concord's reach. 6 days before she could begin the next phase of her journey. 6 days with this human captain whose eyes held their own depths of secrets and sorrows. She had chosen this ship carefully, small enough to slip through detection grids, unremarkable enough to avoid attention, captained by someone with a reputation for asking few questions and forgetting faces when credits were sufficient. What she hadn't anticipated was the strange resonance she'd felt upon seeing him, a discordant note in her carefully calculated plan. Lyra closed her eyes, steadying her breathing. Attachment was dangerous. Curiosity was dangerous. Captain Voren was a means to an end, nothing more. She could not afford to see him as anything else. Not with what she carried. Not with what she was. The Nomad's fortune slipped away from Nexus Edge's docking ring with minimal fanfare, its departure logged in port records as a routine cargo transport bound for the Outer Rim trade routes. Kale guided the ship smoothly through the traffic of the bustling port, his hands moving with practiced ease across the pilot's console. Once clear of the station's gravity well, he plotted a course that would take them through less traveled sectors, a longer route, but one with fewer Concord checkpoints. The ship's aging hyperdrive engaged with a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the hull, and the stars outside stretched into lines as they made the jump to hyperspace. Kale leaned back in the pilot's chair, allowing himself a moment of relief. Departures always carried the highest risk of scrutiny. Now, they were just another ship in a vast ocean of space, unlikely to draw attention unless they were extraordinarily unlucky. A soft sound behind him made him turn. Lyra stood in the doorway of the bridge, her posture relaxed but alert, watching the swirling patterns of hyperspace through the viewports. "Magnificent, isn't it?" she said. "No matter how many times I see it, the beauty never diminishes." Kale regarded her with curiosity. Most people either ignored hyperspace or found it disorienting. Few described it as beautiful. "You travel often, then?" A faint smile touched her lips. "Often enough, though rarely with the luxury of appreciating the view." Running from something? The question slipped out before Kale could stop himself. So much for not asking questions. To his surprise, Lyra didn't take offense. "Aren't we all, in one way or another?" She moved further onto the bridge, examining the various controls and displays with knowledgeable eyes. Some run from authorities, some from creditors, some from memories. "And which are you running from?" Kale pressed, surprising himself again. Lyra's gaze shifted to him, and that strange sensation returned, as if he were being assessed by something far older than the young woman who stood before him. "All of the above, Captain, and more besides." She gestured at the navigation console. "Your plotted course avoids the Suresh checkpoint. A wise choice, though it adds nearly a day to our journey." Kale frowned. "How do you know about the Suresh checkpoint? That's not on civilian star charts. Let's just say I've had to learn which routes are safer than others." She studied the readouts. "Though I would suggest a small adjustment to your trajectory. The Merrick Nebula has increased patrol activity due to recent smuggling activities in the sector." Kale felt a chill run down his spine. That kind of information wasn't just restricted, it was practically classified. Before he could question her further, the ship's proximity alarm blared to life, the jarring sound filling the bridge. "What the hell?" Kale turned back to his console, fingers flying across controls. "We've got company." multiple signatures dropping out of hyperspace directly in our path. The ship automatically reverted to normal space, the streaking stars resolving back into distant pinpoints as 3 vessels materialized ahead of them. Sleek, predatory shapes with a distinctive profile of Concorde enforcement cutters. "They shouldn't be here," Kale muttered, adrenaline surging through his system. "This isn't a regular patrol route. They're not here on a regular patrol." Lyra's voice had changed, all pretense of casual conversation gone. "They're here for me." Kale shot her a sharp glance. "What did you bring onto my ship?" "Nothing you would understand." Her eyes were fixed on the approaching cutters, calculation and resolve hardening her features. "We need to run. Now." The comm system crackled to life. "Unidentified vessel. This is Concorde enforcement. You will power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in immediate hostile action." Kale's mind raced through options, none of them good. The Fortune wasn't designed for combat, and while he had a few tricks and modifications that gave him an edge in evading pursuit, taking on 3 Concorde cutters was suicide. "Whatever you're involved in," he said to Lyra, "it's not worth dying for." "You have no idea what's at stake," she replied, her voice tight. "If they capture me, death would be a mercy compared to what follows. And trust me when I say they won't simply let you go with a warning once they've been aboard your ship." The lead cutter fired a warning shot, a lance of energy that sizzled past their starboard side close enough to make the shields flare in protest. Kale swore under his breath, then made his decision. "Strap in," he ordered, hands already moving across the controls. The Fortune's engines roared to life as he diverted power from non-essential systems. "The baryon field," Lyra suggested urgently. 2 clicks port side. "The magnetic interference will disrupt their targeting systems." "It'll fry our navigational array," Kale objected. "Better than being reduced to atoms," Lyra countered, sliding into the co-pilot's seat with unexpected familiarity. Her fingers moved across the secondary controls, adjusting shield distribution with expertise that shouldn't belong to a mere passenger. Kale didn't have time to question it. He banked the ship hard, redirecting their course toward the shimmering distortion of the baryon field. The cutters immediately gave chase, energy weapons charging as they closed the distance. "They're deploying ion disruptors," Lyra warned, eyes on the tactical display. "Evasive pattern delta." "This isn't a military vessel," Kale snapped, even as he executed a series of maneuvers that no cargo hauler should have been capable of. "I don't have programmed evasive patterns." A blast struck their aft shields, causing the ship to shudder violently. Warning lights flashed across the console. "Port thruster at 60%, Kale reported through gritted teeth. "Another hit like that, and we're crippled." "Let me help," Lyra insisted, reaching for the weapons control. "The guns are for show," Kale admitted. "Haven't had the credits to make them functional." Lyra's expression darkened. Without warning, she reached beneath the console and extracted a small device from her boot. It was unlike any tech Kale had ever seen, a metallic sphere etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid. "What is that?" he demanded. "A distraction." She activated it with a touch, and the sphere rose from her palm, hovering momentarily before she directed it toward the airlock with a gesture that seemed more ritual than technical. "Get us into the baryon field. I'll buy us time." Before Kale could object, Lyra was gone from the bridge, moving with a speed and grace that left him momentarily stunned. Shaking it off, he turned his attention back to piloting, pushing the Fortune's straining engines to their limits as they approached the swirling energies of the baryon field. Behind them, the Concorde cutters were closing fast, their superior engines rapidly decreasing the gap. The tactical display showed weapons locks solidifying on the Fortune's hull. Then, abruptly, the pursuing vessels faltered. Their formation broke as they veered in different directions, sensors apparently confused. Kale stared at the display in disbelief as the cutter's coordinated pursuit dissolved into chaos. Lyra returned to the bridge, her face pale but composed. "The distraction won't last long. They'll recalibrate their systems within minutes." "What did you do?" Kale demanded, even as he seized the opportunity to dive into the baryon field's outer boundary. Created a sensor ghost, multiple false signatures identical to our own. She strapped herself back into the co-pilot's seat. A simple trick, but effective in the short term. Simple, Kale echoed incredulously. That's classified Concorde tech. Military grade. The ship shuddered as they penetrated deeper into the baryon field, electromagnetic energies washing over the hull in rippling waves. The navigational systems flickered, displays distorting before stabilizing as emergency shielding engaged. There's a stable corridor at bearing 227, Lyra said, studying the fluctuating sensor readings. The field density is lower there. We can traverse it without losing all systems. Kale adjusted their course accordingly, acutely aware that his passenger was proving to be far more than she appeared. When we're clear, you and I are going to have a serious conversation about who you really are and what I've got myself into. Lyra's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, something like regret passed across her features. Yes, I suppose we will. She glanced at the rear sensors. They're regrouping. 2 of the cutters are entering the field. Persistent bastards, Kale muttered. Hold on. This is going to get rough. He pushed the Fortune deeper into the corridor Lyra had identified, navigating by instinct as much as by the faltering instruments. The ship groaned in protest, hull plates vibrating as they were subjected to stresses they hadn't been designed to withstand. Behind them, one of the pursuing cutters veered too close to a dense energy pocket and was violently repelled, spinning out of control before its stabilizers could compensate. The remaining cutter, however, matched their path with precision, its superior construction allowing it to weather the field's effects better than the Fortune. We can't outrun them indefinitely, Kale said grimly. And once we exit the field, they'll call for reinforcements. Lyra's gaze was fixed on the tactical display, her expression hardening into resolve. Then we don't exit where they expect us to. She pointed to a section of the field where the energy patterns were particularly chaotic. There, the interference is strongest in that segment. If we can get through it, we can mask our exit vector. If we can get through it, Kale emphasized. That's a big if. Those energy densities could tear us apart. I can help stabilize the ship, Lyra said quietly. But I'll need access to the main power regulation systems. Kale hesitated, suspicion warring with the urgent need for survival. Whatever you're planning, we'll save both our lives, she interrupted. But it requires trust, Captain. Something neither of us gives easily. The pursuing cutter fired again, the shot dissipating in the field's energies but still close enough to rock the Fortune. Damage reports flashed on the console. Minor hull breaches in non-critical areas, automatically sealed, but adding to the strain on already taxed systems. Engineering bay, Kale decided. Third door on the left from the main corridor. Access panel is coded to my biometrics. Lyra nodded once and departed, moving with that same uncanny grace despite the ship's violent lurching. Kale focused on maintaining their course, using every trick and maneuver he'd learned in years of flying the shadowed edges of Concorde space. Minutes later, the ship's power fluctuated, lights dimming before surging brighter than before. The console displays flickered, then stabilized with readings that showed significantly enhanced shield integrity and engine output. What the hell? Kale muttered, both impressed and alarmed at the sudden performance boost. His comm unit activated. I've temporarily bypassed the safety limiters, Lyra's voice explained. We'll have approximately 3 minutes of enhanced performance before the systems begin to degrade from the stress. That'll work, Kale replied, plotting a course through the densest part of the energy field. Brace for extreme turbulence. He directed the Fortune into the chaotic heart of the baryon field, where swirling energies collided and repelled each other in patterns no navigation system could reliably predict. The ship bucked and shuddered, alerts blaring as multiple systems reported critical strain. Behind them, the Concorde cutter hesitated at the boundary of the turbulence, unwilling to risk the unpredictable energies. For nearly 2 minutes, Kale flew blind, relying on instinct and the momentarily enhanced capabilities of his ship. The viewports showed nothing but writhing patterns of energy, blues and purples and whites intermingling in violent, beautiful chaos. Then, abruptly, they broke through into clear space, the sudden absence of the field's resistance causing the ship to surge forward with unexpected speed. Kale immediately killed the engines, allowing their momentum to carry them while minimizing their energy signature. Behind them, the baryon field continued its dance, concealing their escape vector from the pursuing cutter. "We did it," he breathed, allowing himself a moment of relief before the reality of their situation settled back in. "But we're not out of trouble yet." That was an awfully specific pursuit for a random inspection. "They were after you, not me or my cargo." Lyra appeared in the doorway, and Kale nearly flinched at her appearance. Her skin seemed to shimmer with barely perceptible patterns of light that faded even as he noticed them. More striking were her eyes. The violet had intensified to an impossible luminescence that dimmed slowly as she regained control of whatever had happened in the engineering bay. "Yes," she confirmed, her voice steady despite obvious exhaustion. "They were after me, and they won't stop looking." "What are you?" Kale asked directly, abandoning any pretense of professional distance. Lyra regarded him for a long moment, calculation, and weariness mingling in her expression. "Something that should not exist," she finally answered. "Something Concord fears enough to dispatch hunters to the edges of known space." "That's not an answer. It's all I can safely give you now." She moved to the co-pilot's seat, examining the navigational data. "The baryon field has disrupted our intended course. We're off the established routes in an unmapped sector." Kale checked the readings, a cold not forming in his stomach. She was right. The emergency exit from the field had thrown them far off course, into a region that appeared on no charts he possessed. The navigational system's attempt to establish their position was returning only error messages. "We need to make repairs before we can attempt to jump back to known space," he assessed grimly. "Multiple systems are compromised, and the hyperdrive motivator is showing signs of stress fracture. Can we manage it with the onboard resources?" Lyra asked. Kale ran a diagnostic, reviewing the results with a practiced eye. "Some of it. The hull breaches are sealed and stable. Life support is functional. But the hyperdrive needs specialized parts one don't have in inventory." He studied the long-range sensors. "There's a planetary body within range of our sublight engines. Unidentified, but the atmospheric readings suggest it might support a settlement or outpost." "Concord outpost." Lyra's voice sharpened with concern. "Doubtful. This far into unnamed space, it's more likely to be independent prospectors, research station, or perhaps exiles." He plotted a course toward the planet. "Either way, it's our best chance for repairs." As the Fortune limped toward the unknown planet, Kale observed Lyra from the corner of his eye. The mysterious passenger sat quietly in the co-pilot's seat, her composure restored but her attention divided between the viewport and some internal struggle he could only guess at. Whatever she'd done in the engineering bay had taken a visible toll, leaving her with an aura of fragility that contradicted the formidable competence she displayed during their escape. "How did you enhance the ship's systems?" he finally asked, breaking the taut silence. Lyra considered her answer carefully. "I have certain abilities that allow me to interact with energy patterns, temporarily amplify them, redirect them." "That's not possible," Kale stated flatly. "Not without specialized equipment. Not with human capabilities." A faint, bitter smile touched her lips. "You've already deduced I'm not entirely human, Captain. Why ask for confirmation of what you know?" The directness of her response caught him off guard. "Because knowing what I'm harboring helps me calculate the risk," he replied honestly. "Those weren't ordinary patrol ships. They were silencers, weren't they? Concord's elite hunters." Surprise flickered across Lyra's face. "You recognize them?" "I've spent my life in the shadows of Concord space." "You learn to identify the predators that hunt there." His hands tightened on the controls. "Silencers don't pursue smugglers or even pirates. They hunt bigger game. Revolutionaries. Defectors. Forbidden technology. He glanced at her. Aberrations. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implication. Yes, she finally acknowledged. I'm what Concord would classify as an aberration. The result of experiments that violated multiple Concord prohibitions on genetic and quantum engineering. Her gaze turned distant. An attempt to create something that could bridge the gap between human consciousness and the underlying quantum fabric of reality. For what purpose? Cale asked, though he suspected the answer. What else? Power, weapons, control. Her voice hardened with remembered pain. The ability to manipulate energy fields through thought alone. To restructure matter at its fundamental level. To potentially access regions of space-time conventional technology cannot reach. She looked down at her hands. I was one of 17. The only one who survived to maturity. The only one who retained both power and sanity, most of the time. You escaped, Cale surmised. With help. From scientists who realized too late the moral abyss of their work. Her expression clouded. Their compassion cost them their lives. My freedom has cost many lives, including those who had nothing to do with my creation or captivity. The admission hung between them, resonating with something deep in Cale's own history. He knew intimately the weight of unintended consequences of survival purchased at terrible cost. The Carillon Neutral Zone, he said. What's waiting for you there? A relay point. People who can help me reach a sanctuary beyond Concord's reach. She looked at him directly. After what you've witnessed, you must understand why I cannot return to Concord control. Cale nodded slowly. The implications of what she'd revealed were enormous. Concord's brutal efficiency in hunting down aberrations was legendary, partly from fear of their potential power, partly from the political necessity of demonstrating control over technologies that could upend the carefully maintained balance of power among the inner systems. We'll get you to Carillon, he decided, assuming we can repair the ship at this mystery planet. Lyra's relief was palpable, though she tried to conceal it. Thank you. I can compensate you beyond the original agreement. We'll discuss payment when we're both safely out of Concord space. Cale interrupted. He checked the sensor readings again. We're approaching the planet's outer atmosphere. Looks habitable. Oxygen-nitrogen mix. Gravity approximately 1.1 standard. There's a settlement on the northern continent. Energy signatures consistent with a small outpost or colony. The Fortune descended through cloud layers illuminated by the pale light of a distant sun. Below, a landscape of rugged mountains and dense forests spread out, marred by what appear to be ancient impact craters reclaimed by vegetation. Near the largest crater's rim, a cluster of structures gleamed dully, a hodgepodge of prefabricated units and salvaged ship components repurposed into a makeshift settlement. No landing beacon, Cale noted. No comm signals either. Whoever's down, there isn't advertising their presence. Caution would be advisable, Lyra suggested. Independent colonies this remote often have reason to be suspicious of unexpected visitors. Cale guided the ship toward a relatively flat area near the settlement, but not directly adjacent to it. Close enough to reach on foot, far enough to retreat quickly if necessary. The landing was rougher than he'd have liked, the damaged stabilizers causing the Fortune to list slightly as it settled onto the rocky ground. He powered down the engines, but left key systems on standby, a precaution born of hard-learned lessons. We'll approach openly but armed, he decided, rising from the pilot's seat. I'll take the lead. These frontier types respond better to straightforward business propositions than to mysteries. And if they recognize what I am, Lyra asked quietly, this far from Concord influence? Unlikely. But if it happens, he considered the possibilities. We retreat immediately. No unnecessary risks. In the armory, a glorified closet adjacent to his quarters, Cale equipped himself with his preferred blaster and a compact backup weapon concealed in his boot. He offered Lyra a similar sidearm, noting with interest that she handled it with practiced familiarity despite her earlier reliance on more esoteric capabilities. Last resort only, she said, holstering the weapon beneath her jacket. Conventional weapons draw less attention than my other options. They cycled through the airlock and emerged onto the planet's surface. The air was thin but breathable, carrying scents of unfamiliar vegetation and the metallic tang of nearby mineral deposits. A chill wind wound between the rocky outcroppings, bringing with it the first hint of approaching precipitation. Storm coming, Kale observed, eyeing the darkening clouds gathering over the distant mountains. Let's make this quick. They walked in silence toward the settlement, alert for any sign of surveillance or threat. Kale found himself uncomfortably aware of Lyra's presence beside him. Not merely physical proximity, but a subtle charge in the air around her, as if her very existence altered the space she occupied. As they approached the settlement's perimeter, Kale noted the signs of a community built from necessity rather than design. Modular structures clustered haphazardly around a central area, connected by improvised walkways. Power cables snaked between buildings, feeding from what appeared to be a combination of solar arrays and a small fusion generator. The few people visible moved with purpose, their clothing practical and well-worn. A figure detached from the shadows of the nearest building, stepping into their path with calculated casualness that didn't quite conceal the readiness for conflict. A woman, tall and whipcord lean, with weather-beaten features and eyes that had seen enough of life's harshness to expect more of the same. "Don't recall sending out invitations," she remarked, one hand resting conspicuously near the weapon at her hip. "Especially not to a ship flying with outer rim registry." "Mechanical difficulties," Kale explained, keeping his posture relaxed despite the tension in the air. "We had run in with a baryon field that did a number on our hyperdrive. Looking for repairs, willing to pay or trade." The woman's gaze shifted to Lyra, lingering with a hint of speculation before returning to Kale. "We're not a service station." "No, you're survivors," Kale countered, gesturing subtly at the settlement's cobbled-together architecture. "Exiles, maybe, voluntary or otherwise. Which means you understand the value of mutual assistance when a void gets hungry." A flicker of reluctant acknowledgement crossed the woman's face. "Hyperdrive parts are precious out here. What are you offering in exchange?" "Medical supplies, preserved foodstuffs, small arms and ammunition." Kale purposely left his more valuable cargo unmentioned. "Plus news from the Concord borders, if that holds any interest." The woman considered this, her expression giving nothing away. Finally, she nodded. "I'm Sarah. This is Refuge Point. You can speak with our mechanic about the parts you need." Her attention shifted to Lyra again, more pointed this time. "Your friend seems a bit out of place for a cargo hauler." "Paying passenger," Kale replied smoothly. "Her business is her own." "Everything's everyone's business out here," Sarah countered. "Safety depends on it." To Lyra directly. "You have a name?" "Lyra," came the calm response. "I'm grateful for any assistance your community can provide." Something in Lyra's voice or manner seemed to ease Sarah's suspicion marginally. She gestured for them to follow. "Storm's coming in fast. We can discuss terms inside." As they moved deeper into the settlement, Kale noticed details that told a more complex story than the initial impression of a simple exile colony. Certain equipment was too sophisticated for frontiersmen. Some individuals moved with a disciplined awareness of military training, and scattered among the practical structures were devices whose purpose wasn't immediately obvious. Sensor arrays disguised as environmental monitors, defense systems camouflaged as maintenance equipment. They were led to a large central building that appeared to serve as a communal gathering place. Inside, various residents paused in their activities to observe the newcomers with varying degrees of curiosity and wariness. Sarah directed them to a corner table, relatively isolated from the others. "Wait here. I'll fetch Naren." She left them alone, though Kale noted they were far from unwatched by the room's other occupants. "What do you make of this place?" he asked Lyra quietly. She surveyed the room with careful attention. "Former Concord specialists," she assessed. "Scientists, engineers, possibly military. Self-exiled or banished for political reasons rather than criminal ones. They've been here at least 7 or 8 standard years, judging by the adaptation of their technology to local conditions." Kale raised an eyebrow. impressed by the precision of her analysis. Dangerous? Not inherently, but they will protect their sanctuary at all costs. She lowered her voice further. There's sophisticated monitoring equipment throughout this structure. We're being scanned as we speak. Before Kale could respond, Sarah returned accompanied by a heavy-set man with calloused hands and intelligent eyes partially hidden behind protective goggles pushed up onto his forehead. Stains of various mechanical fluids marked his coveralls, and a complex multi-tool hung from his belt. This is Naren, Sarah introduced. Our miracle worker when it comes to keeping technology functioning beyond its intended lifespan. The mechanic nodded in greeting. Heard you had a disagreement with a baryon field. Nasty business, those. What's the exact damage? Kale detailed the hyperdrive issues while Naren listened with professional attention, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated a depth of knowledge rare outside Concord's premier shipyards. Can be fixed, he concluded, but the parts you need are specialized. We've got some components salvaged from a similar system, but they'll need significant modification to interface with your older model. How long? Kale asked. 3 days, minimum. And that's assuming I drop everything else. Kale frowned. 3 days was longer than he'd hoped. 3 days during which the silencers could potentially track them down. 3 days of vulnerability for both him and his increasingly complicated passenger. Sarah, who had been observing the conversation with careful attention, suddenly focused more intently on Lyra. You look familiar, she said slowly. Have you served in Concord facilities? Perhaps the research division? The atmosphere in the room subtly shifted. Conversations nearby quieted as attention turned toward their table. Lyra maintained her composure, though Kale noticed the barest flicker of that strange luminescence beneath her skin, quickly suppressed. I've had connections to various Concord operations, she replied neutrally. As have many here, I suspect. Sarah's expression hardened. Very specific operations, I think. She made a subtle gesture, and Kale became aware of several individuals moving to positions that effectively cut off easy access to the exits. The kind that leave distinctive energy signatures. Signatures our sensors detected the moment you entered our settlement. We're not looking for trouble, Kale interjected, mentally calculating their options if the situation deteriorated. Just repairs and supplies. Intention doesn't mitigate risk, Sarah countered, her attention still fixed on Lyra, especially when the risk involves Concord's quantum sentience program. Lyra went very still. You know of it. Several of our scientists were approached to join it before they chose exile instead. Sarah's hand moved closer to her weapon. They recognized the ethical catastrophe it represented, and they'd recognize its outcome, even years later. Tension crackled in the air, thick enough to taste. Kale's hand hovered near his own weapon, though he knew drawing it would only escalate the situation beyond recovery. I'm not a threat to your community, Lyra stated with quiet intensity. I'm a fugitive, as many of you are. The difference is only in degree, not in kind. The difference, Sarah corrected, is that your presence could bring Concord's most relentless hunters to our doorstep. Silencers don't give up a pursuit once it's begun. Kale exchanged a glance with Lyra, seeing the calculation in her eyes that matched his own. Their earlier encounter with the silencers couldn't have been coincidence. If they'd tracked Lyra to Nexus Edge, they could eventually trace the path to this remote planet as well. You're right, Lyra acknowledged, surprising both Sarah and Kale. My presence endangers you. I wouldn't have come had there been any alternative. She faced Sarah directly. But the danger exists whether I stay or leave immediately. If the silencers followed us here, and we have reason to believe they might, leaving now would only delay the inevitable for you while ensuring our capture. Naren, who had remained silent during the confrontation, finally spoke. The storm would prevent immediate departure anyway. Class 4 ionic disturbance, according to the atmospheric sensors. Any ship lifting off in those conditions would be crippled before reaching orbit. Sarah's expression tightened with frustration. So we're trapped with a quantum aberration while Concord hunters potentially close in. Wonderful. Not trapped, Kale interjected. Presented with an opportunity, for mutual benefit. When Sarah turned her skeptical attention to him, he continued, "You have defenses here, more sophisticated than you've let on. We have information about current Concord pursuit tactics and patrol patterns. Together, we stand a better chance than either party alone." A long, tense silence followed as Sarah weighed the proposal, her gaze moving between Cale and Lyra with calculating assessment. Finally, she came to a decision. "You'll remain under surveillance at all times. Any action perceived as threatening will be met with immediate and terminal response." Her gaze fixed on Lyra. "And you will control whatever abilities you possess while within our settlement. First sign of instability, we'll neutralize you regardless of the consequences." "Clear." "Perfectly," Lyra agreed, a flicker of relief visible beneath her composed exterior. "Naren will begin work on your hyperdrive components," Sarah continued. "In the meantime, you'll provide detailed information on the silencer pursuit craft you encountered and their likely tracking methods." The immediate crisis defused. They moved to a more private area, where Cale shared everything he knew about Concord enforcement tactics, while Lyra provided insights into the specific technologies the silencers might employ to track her unique energy signature. As information was exchanged, the settlement began preparations for potential conflict, repositioning sensor arrays, checking defensive systems, establishing evacuation protocols for noncombatants. Hours later, as the storm raged outside, Cale and Lyra were escorted to temporary quarters, a small, sparse room with 2 narrow bunks, its door locked from the outside and undoubtedly monitored continuously. "Well," Cale remarked quietly once they were alone, "this is going about as smoothly as a neutron star collision." Lyra sat on one of the bunks, fatigue evident in the lines of her body despite her continued composure. "I've endangered you far beyond what our arrangement warranted. I apologize for that." Cale leaned against the wall, studying her with newfound curiosity. "You know, most people would be more concerned with their own survival in this situation." A faint, tired smile touched her lips. "Perhaps I progressed beyond being most people in more ways than one." She looked up at him. The violet of her eyes deepened to something more complex in the room's dim lighting. "You could have abandoned me back there, offered me as a distraction while you negotiated repairs for your ship. It would have been the logical choice." "I've never been accused of excessive logic," Cale replied dryly. Then, more seriously, "I made a deal to get you to Carolon. I honor my contracts, even when the terms have changed so drastically." He considered this, surprising himself with his answer. "Sometimes the terms that matter aren't the ones written down." Lyra regarded him with quiet intensity, as if seeing something in him that he himself wasn't fully aware of. "The scientists who helped me escape said something similar. That when fundamental principles are at stake, formal obligations become secondary." "I wouldn't go that far," Cale cautioned. "Let's just say I dislike being dictated to, whether by Concord regulations or frontier colonists." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant howl of the storm and the occasional creak of the settlement structures adapting to the wind's assault. Cale found himself studying Lyra with growing curiosity, not just the enigma of her abilities, but the person beneath them. Despite everything, she maintained a core of dignity and restraint that spoke of internal discipline far beyond mere survival instinct. "You said you were the only survivor of 17, he said finally. "What happened to the others?" Pain flickered across her features before being carefully contained. "Most didn't survive the initial procedures. Quantum consciousness isn't easily grafted onto human neural structures." Her voice grew distant. "Those who survived longer, fractured. Reality becomes fluid when you can perceive and interact with its foundational components. Without sufficient anchoring to conventional existence, the mind disintegrates." "But you didn't fracture," Cale observed. "Not completely." She looked down at her hands. "There were costs. There are always costs." After a pause, she asked, "And you, Captain? What drove you to the edges of Concord space, running cargoes that empires would rather remained undelivered?" It was Cale's turn to feel the probe of uncomfortable memories. The usual story. Believed in something. fought for it, lost. He moved to the room's small viewport, watching the storm's fury lash the settlement. Was part of a resistance cell in the Atrian system during the Resource Wars. Concord promised autonomy, then stripped the outer colonies of every valuable resource once the treaties were signed. You were captured? Lyra guessed. Worse, I escaped when others didn't. The admission felt raw, even after all these years. Made a choice during an extraction that got half our cell killed, including, he stopped, the name still difficult to speak aloud, including someone who mattered more than most. And now you run cargoes on the frontier, Lyra said softly, helping others fight similar battles when you can. Kale's mouth quirked in a humorless smile. Occasionally, when the credits align with the cause. He turned back to face her. We should rest while we can. Tomorrow won't get any simpler. As if in answer, a distant alarm sounded, cutting through the storm's noise with insistent purpose. Moments later, the door to their quarters slid open to reveal Sarah, her expression grim. Proximity alert, she announced without preamble. 3 vessels entering orbit. Concord configuration. Kale and Lyra exchanged a look of mutual understanding. The hunt had found them sooner than anticipated. How long do we have? Kale asked, already moving to gather his equipment. They can't land in this storm, Sarah replied. But they've deployed orbital scanning drones that can operate in the upper atmosphere. 2 hours, maybe less, before they pinpoint your ship and, by extension, our settlement. We need to leave, Lyra stated firmly. Draw them away from here. In what? Sarah challenged. Your ship's hyperdrive is in pieces, and none of our vessels are equipped for the kind of evasive maneuvering you'd need to escape silencers. Naren appeared behind Sarah, wiping grease from his hands with a stained cloth. There might be another option, he suggested. The old research facility in the Western Crater. Before we established Refuge Point, Concord had a preliminary outpost there, studying the planet's unusual magnetic properties. It was abandoned during the budget reallocation after the Resource Wars, but some of the equipment might still be salvageable. What kind of equipment? Kale asked. Experimental shield technology designed to counter certain scanner configurations, Naren explained. If we could activate it, it might mask energy signatures long enough for us to complete repairs to your ship, or long enough for the silencers to assume their sensors malfunctioned and move on to the next search grid, Sarah added, warming to the idea. Lyra frowned. The facility is abandoned? For how long? Nearly 15 standard years, Naren replied. Conditions will be challenging. We don't have better options, Kale decided. How far is this facility? 20 kilometers through difficult terrain, Sarah said. And with the storm, conventional transport is impossible. You have to go on foot. I can navigate in these conditions, Lyra stated with quiet confidence, and provide limited protection from the elements. Sarah studied her with newfound calculation. This isn't an offer to help us out of altruism, she observed. You need our cooperation for the hyperdrive repairs. Mutual benefit remains mutual regardless of motivation, Kale pointed out. We draw the silencers away from your settlement. You fix our ship. Everyone gets what they want. After a moment's consideration, Sarah nodded. Naren will continue work on your hyperdrive. I'll provide you with navigation data for the research facility and whatever supplies we can spare. Her expression hardened. But understand this. If you fail, we'll deny all knowledge of you. Refuge Point survival is my priority. Understood, Kale agreed. We'll need communications equipment to signal once the shield is operational. And weapons, Lyra added. The facility may have automated defense systems still active. Preparations moved swiftly after that. Within 30 minutes, Kale and Lyra were equipped with survival gear, enhanced communications devices, and detailed topographical maps of the region between the settlement and the abandoned research facility. The storm had intensified, sheets of rain lashing horizontally across the settlement, while lightning forked through the cloud-blackened sky. At the settlement's perimeter, Sarah handed Kale a final piece of equipment, a compact device with a simple interface and heavily reinforced casing. Emergency beacon, she explained. Short range, but powerful. If you activate the facility's shields successfully, trigger this. We'll know to proceed with the final repairs to your ship. Kale secured the beacon in his pack. And if we don't succeed? Sarah's expression remained impassive. Then we'll know that too. As they prepared to depart, Naren approached Lyra with an awkward formality that suggested internal conflict. The facility was part of the early quantum resonance research division, he said quietly. Before the more ethically questionable applications were developed, you may find the environment triggering. Lyra's expression revealed nothing, but Kale noticed the subtle tensing of her posture. Thank you for the warning, she replied simply. They set out into the storm, the settlement's lights quickly swallowed by the torrential rain and wind. Lyra took the lead, and Kale observed with fascination as she extended her awareness somehow, creating a subtle barrier around them that didn't stop the storm's fury, but deflected its worst effects enough to make progress possible. The journey was grueling nonetheless. The terrain alternated between dense undergrowth that clutched at their clothing and slick rock faces that required careful navigation. Multiple times they were forced to detour around flash floods or areas where lightning strikes had ignited the strange, oil-rich vegetation into brief but intense conflagrations. Throughout it all, Lyra maintained that partial barrier, though Kale could see the effort it required. After several hours, her steps began to falter, her breathing becoming labored. During a brief respite beneath an overhanging cliff face, he confronted her. You need to conserve your strength, he insisted, offering her a ration pack from their supplies. We're still at least 8 kilometers out, and you'll need more than physical energy to deal with whatever's waiting at the facility. Lyra accepted the ration with a grateful nod, consuming it methodically. The storm will provide some natural interference with the silencer's scanning technology, she reasoned. We can afford to reduce the shield intensity. As they continued their journey, Kale found himself increasingly impressed by Lyra's resilience. Where he had expected fragility beneath her composed exterior, he instead discovered layers of determination and adaptability forged through experiences he could only imagine. How long have you been running? He asked during another brief rest, this one necessitated by a particularly violent phase of the storm that made progress temporarily impossible. Lyra leaned against a boulder, rain streaming down her face despite the partial protection of her hood. 3 standard years, she replied, though it feels much longer. Alone the entire time? A shadow passed across her features. Not initially. There were others who helped me escape the facility where I was created. Scientists, technicians, even a few security personnel who couldn't stomach what the program had become. She looked away. None of them survived the first year. Concord's pursuit was even more relentless then. Yet you kept going, Kale observed. What choice was there? She asked simply. Surrender meant becoming either a laboratory specimen again or a weapon deployed against my will. Death seemed preferable, but she trailed off. But survival is a powerful instinct, Kale finished for her, understanding completely. She met his gaze then, something like recognition passing between them. 2 survivors of different catastrophes, bound by the common thread of perseverance against overwhelming odds. The moment was interrupted by a distant rumble that differed from the storm's constant barrage. Kale tensed, reaching for his weapon as he scanned the surrounding darkness. Orbital craft, Lyra identified, her gaze turning skyward despite the limited visibility. Lower altitude than they should risk in these conditions. They're getting desperate. We're confident, Kale countered grimly. Let's move. We can't afford to be exposed if they're deploying ground forces. They pressed on through increasingly difficult conditions, the landscape becoming more rugged as they approached the massive crater that housed the abandoned research facility. The storm finally began to abate as they reached the crater's rim, allowing brief glimpses of the structure below, a complex of interconnected buildings half reclaimed by the planet's aggressive vegetation, its once gleaming surfaces dulled by years of exposure and neglect. Kale studied the facility through enhanced binoculars, noting signs of still active security measures. Automated defense turrets at the main entrance, he reported. Powered down, but likely to activate on proximity detection. Lyra surveyed the complex with an expression that mingled wariness and recognition. There's a secondary access point for maintenance and emergency evacuation, she suggested. Standard design for these facilities includes underground access tunnels. You've been in places like this before, Kale noted. It wasn't a question. I was created in one, she replied quietly, and held in several others before my escape. The layouts are consistent. Efficient containment prioritized over all other considerations.